That's Leslie Nielsen's favorite joke. A fart. He loved it so much he would carry around a tiny whoopee cushion, breaking wind and always denying that he'd done it in restaurants and anywhere else he happened to be. He never tired of this joke. How much did he love this fart machine? Here's a montage of him putting it to use on several talk shows.
My first guest has been in over 60 motion pictures, including the Poseidon Adventure, remember?
Oh, yeah, that's where the boat turned upside down and Shelley Winters swam.
Yes, that's what that movie was. It's nicely condensed. He's also in Airplane and the Naked Gun series, and he's also recently taken up golf and has a new video called Bad Golf Made Easier. Please welcome Leslie Nielsen. No, actually, I am a big fan of those pictures because I love the way you play it so straight. I love the way, I guess the director told you, it's not a comedy, act as though this is deadly serious.
The director, the thing is that we know that we're being funny, but you can't let the audience know for 1 second that you're trying to be funny, not for 1 second. Although I will do almost anything I can for a laugh. I said almost. I didn't say I would do anything for a laugh.
What have you got there?
Isn't that a little personal? You'd like to see it? That's what I have. There it is right there.
What the hell are you doing? What is the, hold it, let's show this.
You heard the rude noises that it makes?
Yes, I did.
Nothing but fun. I got that for a man in Oklahoma City, Jack Martin. He was a senior golf pro, and one night he said, Leslie, I'm going to give you something to change your life. I did, too. I've had nothing but laughs. So
you don't carry this around everywhere?
I do not travel anywhere alone.
Oh, yeah. You know, now people, permit me to be funny in front of the camera.
Speaking of television roles, aren't you getting enough fresh fruit?
You're just a symphony of bodily functions tonight. It's lovely. You are a single man?
Now we know you as this funny guy. Will it be hard for you to do serious stuff again, especially after breaking wind twice in this interview? I think so. No. I think somebody did it 3 times.
Oh, I see. Oh, you think maybe, well, I'll go for the record then somewhere along the way. But, I'm always associated with being, a man who has a background and education, and I'm well-mannered, and, I have to protect that image when I'm
I happen to know that you take this with you virtually everywhere, and you've been known to spring it on an unsuspecting passenger on an elevator or whatever.
Oh, the elevator is the playground. It's like the football field for football players. You get in, everybody's so quiet in there, and you're not, nobody says a thing. It could be quite crowded, and it's so quiet, and you go, look around. And if you want to, you can, look.
Well, and you do wince, too, sometimes.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, you have to sell it.
On the other hand, you're recognizable. Do they turn and say, Mr. Nielsen?
They did that with my wife, Barbara Reed. One time, this lady was talking, and I sort of was around her doing something, and I did this, and she turned and looked at me, and then she looked at my wife and said, and you sleep with him.
Excuse me, I don't know whether I can do this. I'll do the best I can, though.
All right, we're getting near lunch, and I know you're a little...
Well, it was the salmon. Sometimes you just get a wrong piece of salmon.
Was that you?
Well, I don't see anybody else in here who's gonna be doing it. Excuse me. But you can show it. I don't care. I just don't care anymore. These things don't bother me.
All right, well then we'll start now, then we'll begin.
Did you hear the starter pistol? Keep your ears open.
All right, now we'll begin.
That's for me too, right? I'm beginning.
You'd hate to compare Leslie Nielsen to a fart, but he probably wouldn't have it any other way. Like flatulence, Leslie Nielsen seemingly came out of nowhere. He was a serious character actor in films, but then surprisingly in the 1980s, he began to spread, filling the air, so it was impossible to ignore him. His deadpan persona, along with great material, made him a comedy star in the 1980s, as Dr. Rumack in Airplane and Frank Drebin in The Naked Gun. Those 4 films alone, accounting for inflation, totaled over $750 million. It's not Eddie Murphy money, but it's not that far off either. Nobody could do this type of comedy better than Nielsen. However, Leslie Nielsen also had the drawbacks of a fart. His highest heights quickly evaporated. After The Naked Gun 3, Leslie Nielsen kind of fell off the face of the map. There were high hopes for Dracula Dead and Loving It from Mel Brooks, but it seemed that Frank Drebin was simply dressed up as a vampire. And the public had grown accustomed to Leslie Nielsen. He was no longer surprising. For the rest of his career, he would star in Frank Drebin-type roles, often referencing past roles for cheap laughs. But perhaps that's his most endearing quality. Leslie Nielsen is generally always Leslie Nielsen. He delivered what was expected, happy to repeat a line from Airplane just to get a smile. In this episode, we will look at some of Nielsen's lesser-known films and explore them with the people who made them. This is a look back at Leslie Nielsen. We begin with The Creature Wasn't Nice, an Alien parody, released in 1983, but was released only on VHS in 1983, 3 years after Airplane. The world hadn't quite figured out what to do with Leslie Nielsen yet. Even the precursor to The Naked Gun, Police Squad, couldn't find a home on television and was canceled after 1 season. So Nielsen picked up a smaller bit part in The Creature Wasn't Nice, an indie comedy from Bruce Kimmel, who had made the first nudie musical in 1976, starring Cindy Williams of Laverne and Shirley fame. That film created a very public fight between Kimmel and its studio Paramount over the content and release, which resulted in Kimmel being blackballed at Paramount and many other studios, which left The Creature Wasn't Nice in quite a pickle. Director Bruce Kimmel.
Release? Yeah, there was no release for the film. It played in one city for about a day. I did so much work at Paramount, and then Paramount was closed to me, and I was on a sort of an ABC gray list, too, because I auditioned for a pilot that I basically got. The producer called me, and he said, because I had worked for him before, and he said, you know, you have this, but they're telling me I can't use you. That's how I found out about all this. So I remember going, Cindy had an office at Zoetrope, what was then Zoetrope. So she said, I told her the idea for The Creature Wasn't Nice. She loved it. So she said, go write it in my office. So that's where I wrote that film, on the lot at Zoetrope, watching them shoot One from the Heart. And I had an agent at the time, the Gersh Agency, and they put that deal together. But it was hard because she wouldn't really commit on paper. And we finally got her to commit on paper on my birthday in 1980. And it was the night John Lennon was killed. And I thought, this is not a good omen. I have this joy, and then I have to watch that on TV. We had her in tow, and that got us the money instantly. And the money came from the man who released Nudie Musical in New York. He's the first person I went to, and he gave us the dough, and on we went. And again, that happened very, very quickly. Once Cindy committed, I would say 3 months later we were in pre-production. But the casting of that film was hilarious and was very, very interesting. No, it went on for a long time, this casting process, because the Gersh Agency was trying to sort of what they call today packaging. So the litany of people that we had attached to this movie at one time or another was really funny. And the turndowns we got were really funny. And then I remember we went to all of the Airplane people. We went to Robert Stack, who turned it down. You know, all those kinds. Lloyd Bridges turned it down. And then we went to Leslie, and Leslie flipped out for it. He just loved it, and he said yes instantly. Leslie was great. We had one, I think, read through of the script. I don't like rehearsing much, so I think we just read through the script once. And I remember listening to the script and going, Jesus. I said, well, let's fix some of this when we're shooting.
I will now entertain you with a dramatic reading from the ship's log. Tuesday, December 4th, 2012. Performed our morning duties, had breakfast, synthetic flapjacks, and sinker.
He's great in it. We knew he was great, and that's all the script. I mean, that's all scripted. But his takes on it, and he's a genius. I mean, and I saw him many, many years later, and he just said that was the most fun picture to shoot. He was great. The whole talent show was fun to do. Again, the set was crap.
Kimmel remembers Leslie bringing his whoopee cushion to set and causing quite a stir.
Patrick McNee never knew what it was, so he would go, "Is Leslie having problems?" And Cindy Williams' mother came to the set. She goes, "I could give him some vitamins that will help him," and he would use it in scenes. I mean, it was hilarious. I mean, I had to cut around it a bunch of times. I mean, in the scene where they're going down the corridor, and Garrett Graham keeps glancing back at him. It's the glance back. You don't hear the sound, but he's glancing back because Leslie is farting every step, and we're all howling behind the cameras, But it was funny stuff, and that's who he is. He's a practical joker, and he's a genius in the film. And I have to tell you, the dailies of the film, they were hilarious. We thought we were going to have the biggest hit in the history of the movies, and then you get an editor who was a drunk. I mean, he was a drunk. I mean, there's no getting around. He was a drunk. He had an alcohol problem, and that's what we got. We got a film cut in an alcoholic stupor, I guess. The idea was just as simple as can be, a musical version of Alien. I mean...
The rest of the early 80s weren't much better for Nielsen. Nielsen was on the verge of being a flash in the pan. But then finally, in 1988, The Naked Gun would secure his spot as a comedy icon.
I don't want any more trouble like you had last year on the South Side. Understand? That's my policy.
Yes, well, when I see 5 weirdos dressed in togas stabbing a guy in the middle of the park in full view of 100 people, I shoot the bastards. That's my policy.
That was a Shakespeare in the Park production of Julius Caesar, you moron.
His follow-up film was more in line with what became his comedy persona. He played Father Jebediah Mai in Repossessed, a parody of The Exorcist and other horror films. Directed by Bob Logan. Here's Bob Logan with the story.
My joke answer to how I started in the industry is I took a mentally defective attitude and decided to build a career around it. And eventually I got a job at the old Westwood Comedy Store. It's no longer there. And I started, I was working as a manager there. I was the doorman and manager and whatever. And I started seeing these young comics going up. Guys like somebody didn't know, like Gary Shanley, and a guy named Gary Shanley, and a new guy named Sam Kennison, and these kind of people. And I approached the ones that I thought had a chance of really succeeding. And I went up to him, approached him, and I said, I could write for you. And I started writing for him, and so I started writing for Shanley and Kennison. And then all of a sudden I started getting a good name as a writer amongst the other writers. And then the bigger name people like Joan Rivers and Rodney Dangerfield heard about me, and pretty soon I'm writing for them. And so I started off as a stand-up comedy writer. And then got into the idea of wanting to make movies. So I started writing scripts, got a couple options, nothing never got made. And then I met a guy named Murray Langston, who's the unknown comic from the old Gong Show, a comedian with a bag on his head. And we became friends, and I had an idea for a little low-budget movie. He loved it, so let's do it, write it together. We wrote the script together, and he says, I want to produce and be in it. And I said, I want to direct it. And boom, we made a little movie called Up Your Alley with Linda Blair in it. Made that for about $85,000, and it made about $3.5 million worldwide. So that's how that ties into Repossessed and gets to Leslie, actually. While doing that movie, Up Your Alley, I became very close with Linda. I had directed her in something else, not a movie, but a little made-for-home video called How to Get Revenge, which was interesting, fun thing. Yeah, it was a pretty neat idea. It was the whole idea is vicariously everybody's got at least one person they like to get even with. So we showed them, just for entertainment value only, how to get even with people, ruin their credit, break up their marriage, like that. And actually, it wasn't even going to star her at first. It was going to star G. Gordon Liddy from Watergate fame. I flew him in and we met and he wanted to do it. And we were all set. And about 2 weeks before we started shooting, he got run over by somebody in front of his house. And he couldn't do it. No joke. And then we thought, who the hell to do it? And then it just hit me. How about Linda Blair? Because, what do you call it? And we'll say the devil made me do it. It all ties into the whole revenge thing. And so that's how I met Linda. But while doing Up Your Alley, though, is when I came up with the idea of doing a spoof of The Exorcist. Because it was one of the films that really affected me when I saw it. What a perfect thing to lampoon. And I told her, and she said, no, Bobby, I appreciate it, but, people made fun of me because of that movie the rest of my life, and I don't want to be made fun of. I said, I don't want them to laugh at you. I want them to laugh with you. And she said, no, I won't do it. Sweetly, she's a good friend, a dear friend of this day, but, she said, I won't do it. Something told me to write the damn thing anyway. So I went off and spent about a month and a half or so, and I wrote a first draft of the thing. The title hit me right away, Repossessed. That's the whole thing. Devil comes back and takes over Linda Blair again. And she's a wife with kids and everything. So Repossessed was written, and I showed it to Linda, and she read it, and she didn't get it. And it was very much written as if it's Airplane meets The Exorcist, that kind of a thing. And because that style of humor was very popular then. And so I said, you won't do it. I mean, why not? No, she goes, I just don't get it. I don't get the humor. She can't read. Linda doesn't read comedy that well. So there was a new movie out at that time called The Naked Gun, starring Leslie Nielsen from The Guys Who Bought Your Airplane. And I said, I want you to see this movie because this is the style of humor I'm talking about. So I took her up to Universal Studios. There's theaters up there, the City Walk. And we went to a matinee, and she saw the movie, and she laughed her ass off. And she says, I get it. She goes, okay, is that the style? I get it. Now it makes sense. And all. So she goes, okay, I'll do it. But I just got one thing, one parameter, one thing you have to do for me if I'm going to commit to it. And I said, what's that? She goes, get Leslie Nielsen to play The Exorcist. Now, in today's way of looking at things, that's like somebody coming to me and saying, just get George Clooney to be in our little movie and we'll do it. Or get Tom Cruise, just get a big name and we'll do it. So I was like, okay, I can get her, but how do I get Leslie? Well, it so turns out that about, I would say, 8 or 9 years before that, I had actually gotten a hold of Leslie. I don't know how, but I got a hold of him through his agent or something like that, and he agreed to meet me for lunch, talk about another idea I had, which was a comedy documentary called In Search of Those Darn Mysteries. It would have been a documentary spoof that was like looking for Bigfoot and UFOs and all of the subjects like that in one documentary. And Leslie would have been the host, kind of like Leonard Nimoy in a series called In Search of from the 70s. Anyway, the great thing for Leslie and with Leslie is that he had the voice, the wonderful dignified voice, and he had the very dignified look with the silver hair. He looked like he's a CEO of a corporation. And then he farts. And with this device, and it was hysterical. When I do it, people would look at me and go, he's a freak. He's a freaky-looking guy, so we expect it from him. But you don't expect it from Leslie. And he would do it at restaurants like you wouldn't believe. He'd love doing it at restaurants and elevators. Again, master blaster with a farter. Most of the stories would be about with that damn farter. So I had lunch with Leslie 8 years before. And we never got the project going or anything like that. But he gave me his business card. And he said, I like you, Bobby. Call me if you ever come up with a good idea for something. And he gave me his card. So I remembered that. I went, oh, wow. And I went through my files, and I have a lot of files. And I dug for several hours, and I finally found the card. So I call the number. I get an answer machine. Hello, this is Leslie. I'm not in, blah, 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 blah. Beep. So I didn't know what to say. So I go, Leslie, you don't know me. And by the way, I got to preface this by saying that, remember, Naked Gun was a huge hit. When it was in the theaters, it was a massive hit. And Leslie was the comedy guy, the number one comedy actor in motion pictures. So I said, hi, Leslie. Hi, this is Bobby Logan. I don't remember me. I'm the guy who had lunch with you. Anyway, I said, listen, I've got another project. It's a spoof of The Exorcist. I have Linda Blair wants to do it. And I think you'd be, since you're the biggest star in Hollywood right now, I think you'd be the perfect exorcist. Can you give me a call? I appreciate it. Left my number. Hang up. This is 1989 now. Didn't hear anything. Next morning, it's about 6 in the morning. My then wife was lying next to me, and all of a sudden the phone rings, and she's awake at 6 in the morning. She answers the phone, hello, and then all of a sudden she pushes me in bed. Bobby? I go, what? Bobby, what? She goes, it's Leslie Nielsen. I said, what? I grabbed the phone, hello. And all of a sudden I hear Leslie go, Roberto, which is what you like calling me, Roberto. He goes, Roberto. I go, hi, Leslie. And all of a sudden he goes, oh, fuck. He goes, I'm sorry. It's 9 o'clock. I'm in New York. Is it like 6 o'clock? Oh, it's 6 o'clock. Did I wake you up? And of course I go, oh, no, I've been up for an hour. No. I'm dead asleep here. But he told me that he was in New York and he was going to be hosting Saturday Night Live that weekend. And he said, what's this all about? So I told him the project idea and what I've got going for it. And he says, I'd love to read it. He goes, I'll tell you what, just FedEx it to me. It was like on a Tuesday, I think, when he called. He says, FedEx it to me, and I'll read it on Friday. I've got a little bit extra time on Friday morning. I'll read the script, and if I like it, I'll let you know. And I went, great. So I was jazzed. I couldn't wait for FedEx to open that morning. So I printed out the script, sent it out to him. He got it. I get a call from him after the show saying, I love it. And I'm like, huh? He goes, yeah, I'll tell you what. My agent is Sandy Bressler, who was, a big agent in this town, and he's Jack Nicholson's agent and everything else. And he goes, I'll tell Sandy I want to do this. And I said, okay, and hung up. And I was like, freaked. Now I've got Linda Blair and the biggest comedy star with this little script I wrote. What do I do about it? So I needed a producer because I had just done one film as a writer-director. I didn't know about producing. And a guy on my softball team that I had called the 10 Guys from Italy, a bunch of comedy writers. Kevin Nealon was on the team, Michael Keaton, people like that. A guy named Steve Wazan was our third baseman, or no, outfielder. And he was the son of Joe Wazan, who used to run Fox. And he was looking for a project. So I figured, hey, let me give him a call. I called him up, told him what happened. He goes, what? He goes, okay, just stay there. He called his dad, Joe, and all of a sudden Joe, like next phone call, Joe was in. Hi, Bobby, Joe was in. Hi, Joe, never met him, whatever. He goes, let me get this right. You got Leslie Nielsen? I go, yeah. He says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Steve will produce, I'll exec produce, I'll package the whole thing, get ready for meetings. I said, okay. Anyway, within 3 days, we had a deal at Carrico. And that's how the whole thing started. I wrote the script. Everyone loved the script. And then when we went off, and we got the production funding, and the budget was about, I think, around $5.5 million. And we got it going. All of a sudden, I'm in pre-production. Okay, and I really didn't change much in the script. A little bit of punching up with more jokes and little things, and visuals. I just came off an $85,000 film, and all of a sudden I got $5.5 million. You can understand, 8-person crew to an 85-person crew. So I was dealing with the politics of that, but everyone loved the script. So I go off and I shoot the movie. We had about a 30-day shooting schedule, and which is a lot because I had everything you don't want in a movie. I had kids, I had animals, I had special effects. I have everything a seasoned director really doesn't want. And here's a young, guy was 32, I think, but I mean, had never done a big film, and I got 30 days to do it in. Usually would have like 45 or 50. But our budget says that. And I only had Leslie for a week. I only had him for 5 days out of that, because just scheduling and how much money they wanted for him and so forth. But he was great to work with. But still it was a fast amount of time. So that's why in the script, one of the few things I did do was I moved scenes around so that I can make sure that Leslie looked like he was throughout the whole movie, you know, not just at the beginning and the end or something like that. So I did that. But anyway, the production went well, shot it and everything else. Now, after we're done shooting, I'm in the editing room, and I get a certain amount of time to get my cut. I'm not in the Directors Guild. I did not join the Directors Guild. Still haven't. I'm in the editing room with Jeff Freeman, who's my editor, terrific editor, by the way. And we're about 2 weeks away from finishing my cut when all of a sudden it turns out that Andy Vania and Mario Cassar, who were the two head guys at Carolco, the owners of it, sold the company. And all of a sudden, we're now going to meet the new people, not the people I've been dealing with, you know, throughout, the creative people at their end, the new people who are now coming in and taking over. So they come to the editing room, and it was two guys and a woman. That's all I remember, younger people. And they come into the editing room, and they say, well, hi, Bobby, how are you? I'm so-and-so. We're the new people running the creative at the Carolco. Oh, okay, well. And we must be honest with you, we don't know much about Repossessed, except that it's a comedy about stealing cars. And I look to my editor, Jeff, who's sitting right next to me, and he turns at an angle so they can't see his face, and he mouthed these words, we're fucked. And he was right. We were fucked. They said, well, you know, I'm telling them about this. They said, well, you know, what we want to do is we want to hit the kids between ages of, you know, 12 and 18. And I said, wait, what are you talking about? So that's our main audience. I said, no, that's not the way it was sold. When we came to you folks, this is a spoof of The Exorcist. This movie came out in 1972. This is 1989. It was not 1990 now, early 1990. This is 1990. That was, you know, 18 years. These kids weren't born when the movie came out. How are they going to understand a spoof of it? We did it for the people who are a little bit older to get it. They said, no, it's not the audience we want to reach. I said, that's what it was sold for. That's what it was written for. It was shot for. So they said, well, let's get your cut anyway, and we'll take a look. We'll test it, and we'll see how it goes. You have another week. I said, no, I've got like 3 more weeks or something like that to do my cut. No, you got 1 more week because I didn't have the union to back me up, right? So we forced together my final cut in a week, and didn't have a lot of effects in it, any effects or anything like that. And they said we're going to screen it over in Glendale. Went to a theater in Glendale, sat like 500-600, seat theater, pretty big house. And I show up there, and we set the platters, film, and we're getting ready. And then later in the day, they start letting the crowds in, and the crowd consists of 500 12 to 16-year-old kids. And I look at them and I said, this is not the fucking crowd. What is? So we aired the film. We screened it. And the kids laughed at anything that a 16-year-old kid would laugh at. But anything related to The Exorcist, like when Leslie Nielsen's performing the exorcism and he throws up on Linda Blair and says, so how do you like it? Kids didn't get it. When Linda Blair floats above the bed and Leslie takes out a pair of scissors and cuts the line and she drops, kids are like, huh? They didn't get any exorcist-related stuff. So after the film is over, all the questions that the testing people gave were this about exorcists and this about, and the kids, I don't know it. So we huddled with them afterward, and they said, the first thing they said is, all right, we got to cut out all the exorcist stuff. I said, this is a spoof of The Exorcist. That's like saying to Young Frankenstein, we're going to cut out all the Frankenstein stuff. How do you do that? I said, you're going for the wrong audience. This isn't who the other people was. Well, this it basically comes down to the theory. These executives were just like the new lion that comes into the den, and first thing he does is he kills all the cubs of the previous leader of the pack, right? That's what they're doing. They're killing off the film that they don't want to deal with. They want to make their own films. And even though we had the only Leslie Nielsen movie the summer of 1990 and a spoof of The Exorcist, by the way, you know what they only went out with? 40 theaters. And like that. Now, getting back to it for a second here, though. So they said, no, we want to cut all this stuff, and we want to do that. We want to change the ending. The ending was a wonderful ending because in the end, the way I had it was we have this big chase with Linda Blair, the devil being chased through the studio, which they have a lot of that still in the film. But towards the end, Leslie sacrifices himself and dies to save the life of Luke Brophy, Father Brophy, the young guy, Tony Stark. And the funny, his name is Tony. Really, the actor's name is Tony Stark. And at the very end of it, the family's celebrating Christmas. Linda Blair and her family and her husband and the young priest. And there's a little bell on the tree, and the little girl rings it. And she goes, "Hey, Mommy, they say whenever a bell rings, an angel gets his wings, and then we cut to Leslie, who's in heaven now with the little budding wings as back. And that's right, sweetheart. That's right. So it's an homage to It's a Wonderful Life, and it was a totally different ending, but they wanted to go for the kids, so they wanted a music video ending and this and that, whatever. So mostly because I'm stubborn and I fight for what I see and all like that, I said I'm not going to be involved in that. We want to throw some TNA in it. Like they had this whole gym scene, the gymnasium scene, with all the people and the girl with the big boobs and flashing the girl flashes in school and all that. That was that's not my cut. They went off and they reshot with someone else, who I don't even know of to this day. Didn't care to find out. And I left the project because it wasn't going to be the film that I was making. And the stuff that didn't make it because of when they re-edited to make the piece of shit that they turned it into, I had scenes that were just so wonderful. I had, for example, and this would have two things that would have been the biggest, two big laughs in it were at one point, Ned Beatty plays this Jim Baker. It was Jim and Tammy Faye Baker who were the hot religious people who were con artists on television. And they basically played those two people. Anna Schwab was the actress who played Tammy Faye. But anyway, so Ned, there's a scene where Linda's possessed in the bed all tied up, and Ned does something where he looks at her. He goes, "Demon, I cast you back to hell. I cast you back to hell," or whatever. And then I thought, hey, you know what? I called cut and I said, hey, I got a second. I got an idea here. I said, Ned, I need your permission for this to happen, though. And he goes, what? I said, when you say I cast you back to hell, I'm going to have Blair as the devil look at you and go, preacher, does this sound familiar? Whee! Whee! Which is, what happened to Ned in Deliverance, and he's raped. Bill McKinney, I think it was Bill McKinnon, yells, whee! Squeal like a pig. So I thought, oh, what a great reference that would be. It's like breaking the fourth wall a little bit, but wouldn't that be fun? I said, and all I'll do is I'll just cut to you, just giving like a wince to the camera, like, ooh, like I don't need that. So I shot it, and it would have been a big laugh, whee! And just Ned, whatever. That didn't happen. They didn't put that in. Another one was when Linda Blair's tied up in the bed, and we're on a commercial break, if you will, from the Exorcism TV show. I had like a 70-year-old overtly Jewish makeup lady come by, a lot of makeup on her face. She comes by with a cigarette with a 12-inch ash, and she goes over to powder down the devil. And as she goes to powder down, Blair goes, "Get out of here, you old sow," or something like that. And the woman looks at her with just no reaction and goes, "You don't scare me, doll. I once did Streisand for 6 weeks." And that would have got a huge laugh too. So, but so many of the bits got cut out. And just, anyway, breaks my heart. I learned a lot from that film, but it breaks my heart because it should have been, it was the only Leslie Nielsen film in 1990, in the summer of 1990. The only one, the summer after Naked Gun. And in a spoof of arguably the greatest horror film of all time. It should have been 2,000, 3,000 screens. And nope. It's like somebody going to Mel Brooks. No comparison. I'm not comparing myself to Mel Brooks. I'm just saying somebody went to Mel Brooks and said, all right, you got your cut of a Young Frankenstein. Now we're going to take it and we're going to add a car chase and we're going to have some tits and ass and we're going to have gay references and we're going to have all. There's not stuff that I did. It was cheap. It was the lowest common denominator entertainment, tits and ass, and saying some bad words and making the gay. They had a gay character in the gym who sucks on a banana, And this is not the kind of stuff I do. And my name was going to be on this thing, And but it helped me create a line that I followed in my career now, which really works all the time. And the line is never rationalize an irrational business. Show business is a very irrational business. It'll never make sense. So you drive yourself nuts if you try to make sense of it. Leslie, we didn't talk. When I say we didn't talk, it's not like we're upset with it. I'm just saying. And then I didn't speak for about a month. And then he called me and we talked and I told him, everything. And he said, well, I just want to tell you, I really loved what your version was going to be. Just very complimentary and said, I admire the fact that you fought for what you thought is right. He goes, you're not a product maker, you're a filmmaker. I remember him saying something like that. You're not a product maker, you're a filmmaker.
After Repossessed failed at the box office, Nielsen went back to basics and made another Naked Gun, which grossed even more than the first. Then in 1991, he went back to the dramatic, well, almost dramatic, and played Santa in All I Want for Christmas. It would be a more serious role for Nielsen, who surprised everyone and played Kris Kringle with grace and dignity, even director Robert Lieberman.
All right, so at one point, the children are going to stay with their father down at the diner because their mother and father are divorced. The basic theme of the movie is it's a mother and father divorce. The little girl is saddened by that and thinks it's Miracle on 34th Street. If she goes to the Santa Claus at Macy's, she'll ask for that for Christmas, and her wish would be to get her mother and father back together, and that Santa Claus in Macy's, department store Santa Claus will make that wish come true. That's the basic premise of the thing. And then ironically, it turns out that the Macy's Santa Claus is, like in Miracle on 34th Street, is the real Santa Claus, and he does in fact make it come true. And the mother and father get together again at the end of the movie. So that's the thumbnail of it. I have in mind Miracle on 34th Street. So I'm looking for like a really important actor to play Santa Claus, like a really good. I would have gone with Anthony Hopkins. Would have been my first choice. It's a comedy, but I want it to have gravitas, and I want it to have meaning, and I would really like Santa Claus to be played by somebody who is a really complex, complicated actor that could make the character into something really interesting. A Robert Duvall kind of guy or something, And the studio just said, okay, we're casting Leslie Nielsen. They didn't even ask me. They went, all right, Leslie Nielsen gets the part. And I went, oh, shit. Now, it's not that I didn't like Leslie Nielsen. I've always liked Leslie Nielsen from Bracken's world. I go back to like early television with Leslie Nielsen. So I've always been a fan of his, but always as kind of a comedian, I never saw him as a complicated, dramatic actor, I was really disappointed. At the time, I was married to Mary Lou Henner, and I said to her, God, they stuck me with Leslie Nielsen. She said, you know what? You got to make lemonade out of lemons. It's like, don't look at it that way. He's an actor. Go and appeal to him as an actor. Tell him what you want. And so I did. And I had a meeting with Leslie, and I said, Leslie, listen, it's a comedy, but you're playing kind of the man who's supposed to be the real Santa Claus. And the real Santa Claus should be have some gravitas to him, like a real person, like a real mythical person. And he loved that idea. And he said, I get it. And then we proceeded to make the movie. And he was so wonderful. And he stepped up. And I think even though the film wasn't one of the great lauded works of his or mine or anybody's, if you go back and you look at it, his work in it is exemplary. I thought he was astounding in it. He played the part with charm and warmth, and there wasn't any of the silly Leslie Nielsen from Airplanes or, he can get very silly. And in real life, Leslie Nielsen was very silly. He used to walk around with a whoopee cushion. He was famous for doing practical joking. He was the practical joker of all time. And so he was a kind of a silly guy who was really such a lovely, loving, you couldn't help love this guy. He was just the warmest, most friendly, agreeable type person you could ever ask to work for or work with. And he took this job as seriously as I asked him to. I've looked at the film a number of times over the years, and his performance holds up really, really well. And I was very proud of what he did. And he looked to me for a lot of dramatic guidance, which I gave him. And I steered him away from his lighter, sillier Leslie Nielsen into a little bit more dimensional characterization of Santa Claus.
Then in 1992, as proof of his status as a comedy elder statesman, he was cast in the finale of Golden Girls and played the future husband of Dorothy Borjnak, played by B. Arthur. Director of Golden Girls, Lex Psaris.
The network really wanted Tony Curtis, and
most of us didn't think that was a great idea, just because of the nature of we kind of knew what the story was. I never really met Tony, but I knew a lot of people that knew him, and he was a little on the over-the-top side. And he also he was a film actor, and that was a big deal too. Whether someone who's trained as a film actor has a lot of trouble in multi-camera, particularly in the old days. They've made it more stop and start and change now, so it's probably friendly. You'll see more film actors do it, but back then we did almost everything in front of the live audience. And so to have somebody, which we occasionally did, who wasn't that quick on their lines or, wasn't that well versed in a play setting, which multi-camera isn't really a play, but it's along those lines, it would be a challenge, basically. And because B was very much involved, and except for Estelle, all the ladies really were best in front of an audience. And, for bunches of reasons, we all kind of thought Tony Curtis, it was a stunt cast, but it wasn't the best casting. Nonetheless, the network really wanted him. So at one point it was like, well, we're just going to have to deal with Tony Curtis. Fortunately for us, he outpriced himself. So then there was a discussion. I believe some of the writers had also brought up Leslie's name independently, but I had just seen a TV movie that he had done with Betty, and their chemistry was really, really good. And I knew Leslie's career, dating. I never had met the man prior to that, but I knew his career back to being much more of a dramatic actor. But by that point, all of the Naked Gun movies and things like that had come out, and the Police Squad series. So, we all knew that he could handle comedy, and we were pretty sure that he would. If he wasn't that well versed in terms of multi-camera, he could still handle the serious and the funny. But one of the producers very, very strongly wanted Lloyd Bridges. And interestingly, in that debate, there was, discussion about, I thought Lloyd would be a little over the top again in his approach, just because of the way he handled comedy, even though Leslie's style of comedy that he was known for at the time was pretty much over the top. I knew he could shade it, and I knew where he was coming from. Lloyd's performances in comedy just tended to be a little bit of, is he in on the joke? Is he not in on the joke? Can he make the adjustments that he needs? And he may very well have. I don't know, but I kind of really thought Leslie would be perfect. And I was outvoted at one point, and I was told Lloyd would be the choice. And then I was gone for about a month because Peter, who did the other episodes that year and did the other episodes on the spin-off year, was coming in to do a two-parter. When I left, that was what I was told, that it would be Lloyd Bridges. And, the week before, come to find out, nope, it's Leslie. And I went, well, okay. So in the long run, I didn't get any credit for it. But, yeah, I was sort of in the loop, but sort of not. And that's the sanitized version. Not at all. I mean, he fit in. And, that was always a challenge. Like, we had Kathleen Freeman on a show one time, and, my God, you can't ask for a bigger, better career, but, and this generally happened with older women guests more than anybody else, but I think they all kind of saw, oh, this is their shot to become a Golden Girl, and they'd kind of overperform and try to overachieve, which was tough because, the show kind of had a certain rhythm to it, particularly, by the 6th and 7th season. So, and I felt really bad for Kathleen because she was very nice. Debbie Reynolds was kind of the same way too. in a different way. But Leslie, none of that. Not just that it was the last episode. It was just he had other things he was doing. Big car nut, by the way. He drove like classic British car. I want to say it was an MG, but it might have been a Triumph. And at the time, this was, 92, he was involved in a project with an electric car company. And I actually had to let him out of a note session because he had an obligation to the thing. And everything was, in really good shape. But we got to the notes, and she's like, "Where's Leslie?" I said, "Well, I had to let him go early tonight." And she was like, "What?" And, but everything worked out fine. And yeah, Leslie was tremendous. I obviously he did the little fart device thing, and, everybody got a kick out of it. And, he was gentlemanly enough and handsome enough and all that. I think other people might not have gotten away with some of the things he did, but it just came out of nowhere with Leslie, and it was wonderful. And he was creative. He was everything you'd want in a guest star and more.
The Naked Truth. This is dedicated to the thousands of people who have made the motion picture industry what it is today. The only business in the world in which the trailer comes first.
In 1993, Leslie Nielsen would publish his autobiography, The Naked Truth, which was anything but factual. Nielsen spends chapters on being in the Rat Pack, originating the role of James Bond, and having an affair with Liz Taylor. The book would not address his real life, which up to that point included 3 failed marriages, and another marriage on the way in 2001. And that was probably for the best. Nielsen was pure zany joy on screen. You didn't need to hear that Nielsen was a tortured artist, an alcoholic, or anything else. After all, this was a man who always had a whoopee cushion on him. So a fake biography gave you more insight into the man than a real one ever could.
As a favor to Al Hitchcock, I made a brief appearance in The Birds. Hitch had run into serious difficulty with his daring thriller. After completion of principal photography of his film, which was the story of a sharp-beaked revolt by thousands of tiny little birdies, he realized his film wasn't working because his birds lacked motivation for their attacks on the town of San Pedro, California. After Hitch and I viewed the rough assembly, the first version of the film, we decided to add the prologue featuring my character. I played an insane ornithologist ridiculed by the people of San Pedro as the bird brain. I tortured canaries with electric canary prods, then forced them to listen to Domingo Mondongo's recording of Nel Blue del Pinto de Blue. Your love has given me wings. Then I turned them loose on the town.
His biography was co-written by David Fisher. Here's what Fisher remembers from working with Nielsen.
Well, it was actually my idea. I created the idea. I was friends with a casting director who knew Leslie's manager. He put us in touch, and literally an hour after I came up with the idea, I was on the phone with Leslie, and Leslie didn't hesitate. He said, I told him what I wanted to do was a parody of a movie star's autobiography, and in particular, it was he's still alive, Kirk Douglas. I had read his autobiography in which he did everything. He was capable of everything, did everything, and it was an incredible book. And in that sense, came up with the idea of doing a parody, essentially, of that book. And Leslie seemed like the natural person to do it. And as soon as I explained it to him, he loved the idea and said, let's do it. Anyway, the way we started is I went out to California, and we began by treating it as a serious autobiography. And we went through lots of potential stories and sort of developed it. And then I came back to New York, and using the character as the basis, did a draft of the book, and then Leslie and I went through it page by page. And what was funny is when I did the first draft and brought it out, and we talked about it, and Leslie said, I love it. I love everything about it except for one thing. And I said, what's that? He said, the character always gets the joke. The character's in on the joke. And rather than the character being the butt of the joke, you know, I then went back to New York and I made the necessary changes and finished the book. You know, he loved, as I did, the dedication. This book is dedicated to the movie industry, the only industry in the world in which the trailer comes first. And Leslie just loved to laugh about that. But there was a lot of things he liked. He loved the concept. You know, Leslie actually, for example, Leslie actually did grow up in Fort Norman, which was isolated 4, 5, 6 months a year and had a population of about 22 people. And Leslie became this international film star, and his brother became the Minister of Education for the nation of Canada. And so one of the things we said is we had a picture of Leslie's home. What we said was that when Leslie became a big star, he was able to buy his home and move it to California. And of course, we showed a picture of an igloo, and then we showed a bucket full of water with Leslie's childhood home in California. So it was that kind of stuff that there was no thing as Photoshop at that point, but we did a version of Photoshop on all the pictures. You know, it just Leslie loved the characters. You know, he really enjoyed the book. Leslie is one of the sweet, decent human beings. I've been very lucky in my career in that I've worked with some very special people. And Leslie and I became good friends. Unlike almost anybody else, whenever Leslie was in New York, he would pick up the phone and call. We'd get together, or the phone would ring once in a while. He'd be out in Arizona. I'll tell you a story. One day, I worked with Terry Bradshaw, and we were together when Leslie called. Oh, and I got a message that Leslie had called. And I said to Terry, do you know Leslie? He said, well, I've met him, but I don't really know him. He said, give me the phone. So he called him, and he says, Mr. Nielsen, this is Leroy. I have that load of wood that your wife ordered, that load of firewood that your wife ordered. Now, Leslie was living in Arizona. It was 110 degrees. And Leslie said, well, I don't know anything about it. And Terry said, oh, yeah, Barbara, she ordered this wood, and this is great wood, and where do you want me to deliver it? And he said, I got a whole truck full of wood here. And whatever Leslie said, Terry just kept going, just kept pushing him. And it got crazier and crazier. And at one point, Leslie said, well, can I cancel? And Terry said, gee, he said, I've carved your initials into every piece. And Leslie was just so sweet. No matter how crazy it got, he just kept going. He wouldn't hang up the phone. He wouldn't let it go. And that was Leslie, perhaps my all-time favorite story. But what he liked to do, and I saw him do this a couple of times, at the, because we flew to a couple of places together, and we'd be at the carousel waiting for the luggage to come off. And Leslie did all this stuff himself. And he would find the most prim or proper woman. It was always a woman, and generally an older woman. And he would go behind her and use the fart machine. And the woman would, everybody would turn around and look, and Leslie would have that ultra innocent look on his face and say, Madam! So, I mean, I can close my eyes now and just see him. Leslie cared about people, and his politics were those things that benefited the most people. And while he enjoyed the financial aspects of his success, money was never an important thing to him. He was not, he liked comfort, but he didn't, it was nothing big, or he didn't need big things, and he didn't need to be Leslie Nielsen, the movie star. He just, to get somebody smiling, to get a laugh, that was what mattered to Leslie. I think about the expressions on his face, because he had a way of communicating with expressions. You know, his eyes and his mouth could operate separately. And I guess that it's an odd thing to say, but for example, we would be in a room when he would be getting ready to use the fart machine, and his eyes would look in one direction as if to say, watch this, and his mouth would get very serious and straight as he was being the good boy, you know, that was now going to do something naughty. And so, you know, I think about that, and I think about him just throwing back his head and his mouth wide open and just laughing. And I mean, I could close my eyes and picture some scenes from some of those movies and from the TV show, and I just start laughing.
In 1993, Nielsen would release an instructional video called Bad Golf Made Easier, which led to a relationship with director Rick Friedberg, which eventually led to Spy Hard. Director Rick Friedberg.
I'm Rick Friedberg, and I was the co-writer and director and co-producer of Spy Hard, starring Leslie Nielsen. I got a call to do a $1 rent-a-car campaign, and the people had written it. They had already signed Leslie Nielsen, and he had turned down their concept. So they called me in. They said, do you want to see if you can make him interested, because this is your thing, in doing these commercials, and you can direct them. So I rewrote all the commercials, and I took them to Leslie, and we pitched it to him over lunch, and he hired me. And he liked them so much, he asked me to do the print campaign, which I knew nothing about. But it was a great little agency, and they really gave me some control, and they were a lot of fun to do, and I became very friendly with him. So he asked me to do a vanity spoof of golf instruction, Bad Golf Made Easier. So we went to Canada and we shot that. It was, at that time, the second biggest selling made-for-home video in history after Michael Jordan's film. And while we're in Toronto making the second one, I get a call from Leslie, his agent, and he said, do you want to direct Naked Gun 3? I said, yes. So he says, fine, I'll set it up. So Leslie gave me the script, which I read, and he set up a meeting with David Zucker. David Zucker, I guess, had his own view on who was good and who was bad, and had kind of a bent nose, because when they went on the European campaign to advertise Naked Gun 2, everybody mentioned my $1 rent-a-car commercials. So it was not a great interview, and I didn't get hired. But in the meantime, my son and his partner, who were seniors in college, thought I had a shot and had written a James Bond spoof. So they got it to me, and I told them I'd get it to Leslie. So we're in Toronto shooting the second golf video, and I got it to Leslie, and he read it, and he liked it a lot, and he said, well, this needs a major rewrite, but I'd like to do it. So I knew one guy who had a contact at Disney with Joe Ross. So we took it and we pitched it to Joe, Leslie and I, and this guy who became a producer. Joe said, this is great, but it needs all male-oriented action spoofs. Because we had stuff in there like Goodfellas and other things. And so he says, if we like it, we'll do it. If we not, we'll give it back to you for free, and you got a month to do it. So my partner, Dick Chudnow, and I completely rewrote it, and we added a lot more male-oriented action spoofs like True Lies, and we took it back to the young executive, and he approved it and took it to Joe, and Joe said, let's go. Unfortunately, he had a budget of $16 million. And with the added action scenes, there was In the Line of Fire also, it took it up to $19 million. So I had to go into the meeting, first I had to go to a meeting with all the legal eagles to tell me why I couldn't do a direct spoof of James Bond. I had to resequence it where it didn't go like the Bond films do, from the meeting with the agency director to the lab to meet Q and that kind of stuff. So I had to kind of rechange it, and I also had to dumb it down a tiny bit because it was a little sophisticated, and it had to appeal more to kids, so I had to put a Home Alone scene in it. After that rewrite, we then went through my having to meet all the physical production and post-production people, and I went with storyboards, shot lists, and justifications of why I needed more money for these increased difficult stunt-oriented scenes. And they approved another $2 million. So I was at almost $19 million. And that's how the emanation of Spy Hard came. And he's the one that recommended me for Naked Gun. And in the golf videos, the guys that actually wrote and produced them were fanatic golfers, as was Leslie. And they said, well, why Rick? He doesn't know anything about golf. And Leslie says, he doesn't know golf, but he knows it's funny. So that's the way that one went. Right before, he stuck in a movie for Mel Brooks called Dracula. And I had read the script, and it was dreadful. And not to knock Mel Brooks, who's obviously a genius, but I went to the shoot because I wanted to, massage my relationship with Leslie, and also see how they shot it and how fast they went and all that kind of stuff. And what I noticed was there wasn't a single whimper to any of the jokes that they were doing. And my experience in comedy is when the crew laughs, it's usually funny. So I came away from there really disheartened because I'm the next movie up, and he's going to come off this film not happy. And also, Mel Brooks had offered him a lot of control, a lot of input in the script, a lot of input in the shoot, et cetera, because in all the Naked Guns, although he was not given noblesse oblige, he did give his input, and they did shoot extra scenes they didn't particularly want to shoot just to please him, knowing that they could always cut them out. But this was his first chance on Spy Hard to have some control, because going back a notch, it was only made because his agent had a codicil. The codicil with him to do it would be that I would rewrite my son's film with Chudnow, whose work he had known. Now, my son and his partner wrote this as seniors in college, and I hated to cut him out of the loop at that time, but he told me point blank, he says, I don't want your son involved in this because you're too close to him and they're too young, they're only 20 years old, and I think you should now do a better job because I know how you write, because he had read a couple of our scripts. So I had told my son, and it killed me because both he and his partner are not only talented, they're just great kids. So they agreed to just step away and let me and Dick take it over, because Dick is really good at dialogue. I'm really good at story, and their original spoof was just spoof after spoof after spoof with not too much attention to story and dialogue, which they later perfected in their later movie. When this was written first, I helped them a lot. I actually typed it. They didn't know the final draft program, and they didn't know what a screenplay format looked like. So I wrote and edited it for them. And it was a delight working with them because they were so appreciative. Once Chudnow and I took over the script, we were asked to go meet with Leslie. So we went up to his place where I'd been a lot of times. And he was, I didn't realize how bad things were going at that time. This is just after Dracula and his personal relationship. And he sat down, he said, comedy is about drama. You have to write a dramatic scene and then alternate funny. And I glanced at Dick Chudnow, who's a terrific improvisational actor and very funny. And the blood had drained out of his face. So he said, I want to do a scene where I'm in a urinal and someone comes in and hears me urinating, and I can't remember where he went from there. But fortunately, we were so close to filming and all this other stuff that we didn't have any more sessions with him or have to worry about anything that he wanted his input for. And once we started shooting, there was just so much to do so quick. I mean, $20 million sounds like a lot of money. It's really not for a 60-day shoot with stunts, 3 cents to a page. But once we started, and as I told you, found out what mood he was in, he really didn't have any input. He would decide once in a while he didn't feel like doing something that was a little bit of a stretch physically for him. And he was 70 years old, so I didn't blame him. Generally speaking, he was a real trooper, but once in a while he wouldn't do it. But we had a great stunt guy who had been his stunt double in every film he'd ever done, and the stunt double was also a great guy. So that particular thing wasn't so much of a problem. Disney is extremely, or it was, maybe still is, rigid in all their parameters of budgeting and legal and everything. And there was a woman that had been working there, I can't remember her name, but she was very famous as the business affairs person in writing a Bible for making up contracts. She later went to DreamWorks. Any rate, in that Bible, it said that you could never pay anyone above the line over 10% more than their quote. The quote is what you made on your last movie. And Leslie had made $2 million on the last, on Dracula, and he wanted 2.5, and they wouldn't give it to him. So I was hooked up with a producer who actually was a lawyer and not a great guy, who went to Leslie and tried to get next to him and get friendly with him, and came up with the idea of making him executive producer, for which he'd get the extra $250,000 and every perk imaginable. 3-bedroom trailer, his own makeup, his own hair, all that kind of stuff that movie stars always get, which I don't care about. I mean, I like to put all the money on the screen, but whatever happens if you get your star happy. He was not a happy puppy. He was not anything he'd been like for 5 years. He was friendly to me. He was nice to me, but he wasn't overly committed and as much excited as he'd always been because of his bad relationship on the post-production in Dracula, where Mel Brooks never invited him to anything. When he came to New York to promote the premiere of Dracula, he saw it and he was devastated. So when he came back, I had that to deal with. And it wasn't as fun as I would have liked it to have been. I made a really bad decision when I first talked to him about the film, because I said, we're going to up your game. There's a lot more spoofs in this than any other spoof film you've ever done, which usually just spoofs a single film. And you're going to play James Bond like James Bond, classier, stylish, smooth, suave, and all that kind of shit. Which he really sparked to. But he became a lot more serious because of it. And I think about a third of the way through, I went into his trailer. We were lighting something. And I said, Leslie, I think you've gotten a little serious. You're so much fun to work with. And you've gotten tight. I said, let loose, let it fly. And it took a while, till about the middle of the film, where he didn't care how stupid he looked Like there was one shot where he's chasing the limousine, and we had an air gun shooting at him. We're traveling in a picture car, and we're shooting back at him running, and his mouth is flapping from side to side. It was hysterical. Well, he saw it afterwards, and he thought it was the funniest thing he's ever done.
Yeah, although once you got him cooking and he knew the material was funny and he knew I liked him, he would be funny no matter what. I think it was inherent in his bones. He has such an incredible rubber face that is just a delight to see. Leslie was never great at improv. What he was great at was physicality. He had a rubber face, and he could turn his face into almost anything. He also had the uncanny ability of when to play it straight and when not to. And these were really advantageous. But in terms of improv, he really wasn't good. Is that what you were asking? Leslie was known in Hollywood as using this little fart machine. It was a mini whoopee cushion he had in his palm. And I think what was he was unique at is never showing a reaction to anything. He would just look straight ahead with a stern face as if nothing happened. So we'd be in an elevator after going out to dinner with a bunch of people in Orange County, and he would do this. And everybody would look around, and he would just be looking ahead at the door, and he'd do it again, and they'd look around. Well, it's everything I could do not to bite my tongue off. And then the doors would open, he'd walk out, and the people who knew him laughed.
Move over, James.
105-page script, 105 minutes. And that's way too long for any comedy, but especially these. This production executive, unbeknownst to me, had called Jim Abrahams, who was still friendly with Joe Roth, and he, the production executive, used a favor in calling Jim and asking him not only what to do, but would he take over the production. Abrams told him, well, let me see the film. No, I won't take it over. And he saw the film. He said, I think it's great. It's so great looking. He says, but it's way too long. Every movie we've ever made is exactly 84 minutes. So my production executive, who had no sense of humor, no creativity, said, the mandate is 84 minutes, end of story. So I didn't have a real good feeling about that, but I started to feel that the writing was on the wall. And at that time, you had 10 weeks to turn in what's called a director's cut. And he wanted to see it before then if he could. So we've been cutting pretty fast, and about just before the 10 weeks, maybe 8 weeks in or 7 weeks in, we previewed it. And it still had some green screen scenes in. And they did a focus group, and the focus group asked questions like, what are those green scenes? I didn't like those. So I thought to myself, I'm getting bulldozed a little bit here. And yet, even though I'm not a get-along guy, if it hurts me, I did get along as much as I could because it was my first major studio film, and I wanted to keep everybody happy and keep in the loop. I never should have done that, but I didn't know because I didn't have anybody behind me telling me, stand your ground. Needless to say, after that horrendous premiere preview, and 2 weeks later, my director's cut to be turned in, I turned it in and received a call from the studio executive saying, we're taking the film over. And I was devastated. I mean, like, I didn't even know what to say. And I told him, I said, this is the most egregious thing I ever heard of. And I'd already had rumors about this particular guy on other films he'd worked on and done the same. He came from television
where television executives at the network, let alone major showrunners, are gods, and directors are treated like cannon fodder. Well, that's different in movies, and it's even more different today. At any rate, they did take the film over, and the first thing they did was they told the editor, I don't know what you have to do, just get it to 84 minutes, because they had no suggestions. And so they cut some scenes out that it killed me. For instance, on the True Lies scene, where there's a bridge scene where Leslie is teetering on the edge of a drawbridge alongside the presidential limo, which back wheels are teetering off the edge of the drawbridge. It was great, and I was shooting 5 cameras, one of which was down below shooting up, and it was 3 stories up in the air, and it looked like a real big film. In fact, a lot of the stuff I shot looked like a big film. I was told it looked like a $34 million budget when it was only 20. And they did everything in their power to make it look like it cost 10. They didn't like wide shot. They didn't like anything that didn't start and end with Leslie. So if I had trucking shots or crane shots or whatever I had that took in production value of the location or the set, etc., and it took 5 seconds or 10 seconds to get Leslie into the frame, they'd just cut it right then when Leslie entered. And they cut anything with a wide shot. To them, they said, kids don't care. But most importantly, they cut the storyline and the dialogue. Because even though it was a spoof of all these different movies, it had a James Bondian type through line that was a flimsy yet really logical story. And when I spoke to the studio executive, I said, how can you cut the story out? He says, kids don't know about story. They don't even follow it. And I recommended, at the time, I wanted a really hot rock and roll group like TLC or Destiny's Child to do a song and do a thing with a moving iris, just like the Bond films. Only in every iris, Leslie does something stupid. Fires at the wrong place, can't get in the middle of the iris, etc. Disney wouldn't allow me to do that. It was too much like James Bond, and they didn't care about rock and roll. So we compromised and came up with the idea of hiring Weird Al to do a song, which he did. And ironically, they allowed him to use almost the exact score from James Bond. I didn't get a good ending. I shot one in the style of James Bond, where he and Nicolette are inside the tonneau cover on a sports car, and he gets a call, and he pops up, and he has to answer his newest assignment, and he starts to get out of the car, and the Velociraptor is on the beach, and it chases him. And it wasn't that funny. So they decided to shoot an ending with another guy, which was a parody of Apollo 13. And instead of putting everybody on wires and yanking them all around so they looked funny because they were in space, they sat there and talked some ridiculous dialogue I don't know who came up with. And it was such a bad ending. So we had to cut that. And the bottom line is that without an ending, you don't have a film. They just decided, we'll just cut it short and have some outtakes. Little knowing that because Leslie was not in the greatest shape or in the greatest humor, there were virtually no outtakes. At that particular point, he was soured on the film, not so much on me, by the feedback he got from David Zucker, who had seen the film, and this same producer, lawyer, who had badmouthed me, and the fact that he saw the preview. So I think the film, which did very well at the box office, according to the guy, the distribution guy who called me after it first opened, and said the exit polls were good, but they would have been great had there been an ending, because it was a letdown. And I wanted to do another music video. I wanted to do, at the time, I can't remember who the artist was, Coolio did a video that was kind of funny. And I wanted to do Leslie doing a music video like Coolio. And they wouldn't let me do that one either. At any rate, a film without an ending is not a film. And their smartest choice was opening this film a week after they opened it here all over Europe. And in Europe, Leslie was a star, and this film grossed 2.5 times in Europe what it did here. So it ended up grossing almost $100 million, which is pretty good. And usually you see some money from that and you get a job from that, neither one of which happened to me.
Nielsen would continue making parody films, including Wrongfully Accused in 1998. And then, 2001, A Space Travesty, which is regarded as one of Nielsen's worst projects. But initially, it held promise. Writer, Alan Sherman.
Here's the genesis of the whole film. Jeff Convict and Leslie Nielsen did a film together called Spy Hard. They had a good experience, and then I think Leslie went off and did something else. And by chance, Jeff ran into Leslie at a bank in Beverly Hills. And they said, "Oh, hi, how's it going?" Da 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 da. And they, and they sort of agreed that they should do another film together. They met a few times and bashed around some vague ideas. And all Leslie knew, all he knew was that he wanted to do a movie where his character or the plot starts on planet Earth, goes out into space, and comes back again. That's all he said. I don't know. I just want something that starts on Earth, goes to space, and comes back to Earth. So they kind of batted around some vague ideas on that. And eventually Jeff said, we really need somebody to write up a treatment and sort of talk about what we've got and, and help us down. And he called me. A couple of days later, we met up with Leslie at Leslie's house here in L.A., and started batting ideas around. And then, and then eventually worked up a treatment, and which went through various drafts, obviously. And in the meantime, Jeff was going out looking for financing with Leslie's name. What Jeff was thinking was that because Leslie was Canadian, that maybe there was some way they could get into the Canadian tax credits for filmmaking. And also, that was okay, but then they also needed like French and German money too. So they connected with Helcon, a company in Germany, and they had, like so many of these films where you have a star from each country, and then therefore each country will put some money in. He sort of cobbled all this together, and he was Jeff was in Cannes, and that's where he met the German connection, and they agreed to put in some seed money, to get a script together and so on. So that's sort of how the genesis happened, and little by little, Leslie and I actually worked on the script a whole lot, and then eventually he said, well, he said that I should take the sole credit, which was, I said, oh, great, I'll get the blame now. And he said, no, I want it to be. But he was really a sort of he was in partnership with Jeff Convict. So, I mean, it wasn't like he was making plenty of money out of it. So it wasn't, that wasn't the problem. But anyway, so it was nice to get a solo credit. I mean, Leslie is not necessarily the easiest, but, he's very particular. I mean, he knows what he's good at, and he knows what he wants. He could be difficult only because he was so particular. I mean, not difficult, but he knew what he wanted, and he knew what he liked, and he knew what worked. He knew his audience. So he knew that, and although it's all very, a lot of the humor, especially in this movie, is very sophomoric, I think. He knew that that's what people, and he, as I say, he knew his audience, and he knew what he wanted, and he knew what wouldn't work with him. So if there were any disagreements, it was because he knew what he wanted, and he knew what worked. And, and generally we went that way, and, I was totally fine with that. I had no problem at all. And that's fine. And, and I understood that. So I worked with him very well. we stayed friends. I mean, there were other, there were a lot of stressful moments. There probably are on any film, but he and I got through it all. I mean, we became quite good friends.
Director Alan Goldstein.
It was really Leslie's script. No, yeah, because you think he's really a funny guy, right? Well, no, he wasn't. But unfortunately, he was a legend in his own mind. So he thought he was really funny. Then he didn't really know what was funny. And I think that's what the Abrams brothers realized. They realized that this guy does not have a sense of humor. And the funny thing is he's going to play, because that is comedy. In order to play comedy, you got to play it for the reality. You can't play it for the jokes, and then it's not funny. So I'm sure they realized in Leslie Nielsen, he was perfect because he was going to play it seriously, and that's what made it funny. He was kind of like a Philip Marlowe character. He was the gumshoe detective. He really embodied that role. That really was him, And in a certain way, these comedies kind of put him on a trajectory that he never should have gone on, even though it made him totally famous. But as an actor, that wasn't who he was. Alan Sherman was kind of trying to polish it up, trying to make it funnier. The proof's in the pudding.
We were adjusting that script right up until the last minute, only because of what was available or new ideas or the way things were working out. And so he and I would still have writing sessions together when we were in Munich, when we were in Montreal, and even in LA here. I like to think I do understand comedy, and God knows Leslie does. So we would have a lot of fun together and make each other laugh, during the scripts and the script sessions and so on.
And so he started working on it, and they decided to eventually, Jeff Konvitz was able to find the financing for it. And so off they went. There was another director attached to it, but that director didn't really see eye to eye with Leslie in terms of the script itself. And so he ended up not doing it. And then Jeff, who I knew from some other movies we had worked on together, asked me if I would consider directing it. And I read the script, and I said, well, it needs some work, but, it's a possibility. Leslie Nielsen, I've had worked with him. It sounded interesting, fellow Canadian. So I thought, okay, let's give it a try. And the rest is history. I didn't think it was very funny, I liked the idea, but somehow I just didn't get it. I didn't really get the humor in it. So they brought another writer on, and I write a lot, but I'm not a comedy writer. And Leslie, I have to say, Leslie was probably one of the more difficult guys to kind of work with. There was an age thing happening, he was to be fair, I mean, he was experienced. He had years and years and years of work as a working actor, as a star. And so it was difficult for someone of my age at that point to even kind of try to get him to hear anything, because his reaction would always be, I have worked in the industry longer than you've been alive. And so that's a difficult... That's a very difficult thing to deal with. But, I did my best to try to kind of make it as funny as I possibly could think it would be. But, here's the thing. If it's not on the page, it's not going to be on the screen. We got to the point where I said, well, I just don't think that. He said, don't worry, just trust me. You'll see, it'll work. I thought, okay, I'll do my best. I'll do my part here. So Leslie was very much, I'm Leslie Nielsen, and that's just the way it is. He was like a kind of a comedic bull in a china shop, really. I mean, he was just so set that this was going to be, really, really funny, that he just, and the other actors were trying their hardest to kind of help. And then he had like German co-stars who spoke English, but it wasn't really their first language, so they didn't know what was funny or what wasn't funny. So if Leslie laughed, they laughed. because they took the cues from him. The crew, on the other hand, we were kind of going, I looked at Jeff and I go, are you sure this is, but and it was odd. And there was, of course, no chemistry between him and the other actors. Yeah, they were saying, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do with this? And I go, okay, well, let's try this, and let's try that, and let's try this. And he wouldn't rehearse with anybody. So, he wanted to just go onto the set and do it. And it was really difficult because, of course, so much of comedy, so much of it is timing. And, it would be kind of, well, they'll have to follow my rhythms. And it's like, well, it's a three-handed scene here. Everybody has rhythms. Let's try to kind of do this cooperatively and collectively, but it didn't. So, I was trying to help everybody really kind of get through it, but it was kind of like one of those things where after a while you think, oh my God, what is going on with this? And to tell you the truth, I felt kind of bad for Leslie too, because I thought, well, this is not the way to kind of, at the the kind of swan song of your career, where at last, he got to actually have all of the power and influence that I think he always thought, he was due. Certainly from those Naked Gun shows and everything else. But at last he had it all, and unfortunately it just didn't really work. But the bottom line was, when the lead is the writer and the producer and the reason the movie's getting done, vanity can really get in the way. And there was no studio to tell him what to do or to say, hey, this isn't working, There was no one like that. It was independently financed. And then, you had, Alan Sherman, who kept telling Leslie how funny it was, and it wasn't, and nobody could really tell him I know he knew. I told him, I said, I don't think this is funny. If you don't really want to hear your director saying that to you. But, it was like, we have to do something. But, no. He basically had the power to be able to make the movie that he really wanted to make. And so, I basically, as a young filmmaker, I just had to think, okay, well, fine, let's do this. He's the old guy. He knows what's happening. I'm probably wrong. And I'll be pleasantly surprised later. I wasn't. There was a good story that you'll be able to use, that's a very good one, that was kind of a precursor of what was to come. And it was the first day of the shoot. And we were in Munich. And we had built a production designer, Csaba Cortez. He did a fantastic, because we were building the moon. He did a fantastic job. And we built it we created it in Montreal, and we created it in Germany. He did a great job. The sets were really, really good. Yeah, the sets were really wonderful. The costumes were good. All of that stuff was really good. So it was the first day on the set, and it was literally maybe the second shot, third shot, I can't remember. We were in a set where Leslie breaks into the office through a window. He then walks along the floor and then trips and goes sliding across a desk and falls down. Now, as he's sliding across the desk, he pushes some bottles of ink, and they fall on the floor, and he gets up, and he doesn't know it, but his face is completely covered in ink. He can't see it. Or that was the idea. So then he was going to walk around, people were going to keep looking at him, and he wasn't going to understand why they were all looking at him so oddly. So take the first shot. He's just like sitting by the window on the windowsill. I get just a shot of him coming through the window. And then I say, okay, now we're going to set up for the next shot, which is you walking towards the desk. And just as you're about to hit this sandbag over here by the desk, just stop, because then we'll put your stunt double in, who will make a trip at the sandbag, slide across the desk and go over and fall over it. Leslie goes, no. I go, well, what do you mean, no? He goes, no, I'll do the stunt. Now, he's not a young man at this point. And I go, are you sure? I really don't think you should do this. And he says, no, I'm going to do it. And I said, really? He goes, yeah. I say, well, I have to tell you, I have to disagree with you and continuity. I say, continuity, I want you to write down in the notes that I am absolutely disagreeing with Leslie that he should not do this stunt. It might seem simple, but stunts are dangerous. She says, fine. She writes it down. We say, okay, let's set up for the shot. And I set up the cameras, kind of multiple camera situation because it's a stunt. And I call action. And Leslie goes, he takes one step, he takes two steps, he takes a third step, he trips over the sandbag and lands face first flat on the desk and breaks his nose in 4 different places. And then I looked at the producer and I said, okay, well, I'm going skiing for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Here's where I'll be. Give me a call when shoot begins again. So off they rush Leslie, and there's blood everywhere, right? And the guy's got a big nose as it is, but now it's like 3 times the size. So they rush him to the hospital, and he's going the whole time, oh, this happens all the time. I'm going, really? He goes to the hospital, they take x-rays, and they can't even find where the break is because his nose has been broken so many times. So he wasn't joking about this. They eventually found it, you know, they kind of corrected it again, put it back, and I got to say for the guy, he refused to stop shooting. He said, no, just put the ink back on my face. You'll never be able to notice it. We'll shoot the scenes, and we'll try to work through it. And so, yeah, so we kept working with the guy with a fractured or broken nose for weeks on end with makeup and everything else to make it kind of, you know, seem everything was okay. And we pulled it off. You can't really tell. But bottom line is this was a precursor of, like, you know, there's a few things coming up that you might be surprised about. So that for me, when I think of Space Odyssey, that's what I think of more than anything. Leslie on the first day breaking his nose. Leslie himself, he was not an easy person to be around, you know. He was a very difficult guy to be around. So I think, you know, if he had been like jovial old Leslie, maybe something, but he wasn't. So he was as a person difficult, very difficult, and that didn't help either. Well, you know, you wouldn't really feel like, oh, I really want to do something for this guy. You'd think, oh my God, let me get out of here. Yeah, he was difficult. It was kind of like, in a way, I guess when I'm thinking about it, it's kind of like trying to work with your grandfather. You know, it's kind of like you love him, but he's kind of crotchety and kind of, you know, gets kind of cranky, and, you know, it gets like close to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, he's kind of slowing down. And it's kind of like dealing with your grandfather not on a good day. You know, what was missing was the beautiful grandfatherly moments that kind of evened out those other moments. No, with Leslie, it really wasn't like that. And, you know, normally like a star would normally, at the end of the shoot, let's say in Germany, normally they throw a dinner for people or do something. Like he did zip for anybody. He did nothing. It was so amazing, you know. I remember once actually, we were at this very expensive hotel called the Kempinski Hotel, very beautiful, and I was sitting down in the bar having a drink, and we were there for, you know, a couple months, and I saw his wife come walking down the stairs with this big green garbage bag. It looked like it was filled with stuff. And I said to her, I said, what can I help you with this? She goes, no, that's all right. And I said, what's in that? And she went, oh, Leslie's laundry. And I went, what? She goes, Leslie's laundry. I go, what are you doing? She goes, oh, I have to go to the laundromat to wash the clothes. Now, the guy's making like a fortune, right? And I go, you're going where? She goes, I have to go to the laundromat to wash his clothes. I go, why don't you just use the laundry in the hotel to do that? Oh, no. Leslie would never permit that. And so that gave me an insight into, like, forget about a dinner for the crew. This is definitely not going to be happening. So that was kind of, you know, thought, oh, wow, okay, I get it now.
A couple of days after we got to Munich, the German producer had a big sort of celebration, start of shoot party, and then billed the whole thing to Leslie's credit card. Again, Leslie was not pleased about that, but he got his money. He was reimbursed and all the rest. And God knows what that cost. I don't know. But so there were always issues about the money was always tentative. But we made the film. You just had to bulldoze on ahead and have confidence that it would all eventually come together and you would get your money and da 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 da. But it was as I often say, it was not without incident.
It was more. I tell you, you know how sometimes, like when you're in an accident, you don't remember much of it. This is pretty much. You can quote me on that. This is pretty much 2001 kind of falls under that kind of statement. It was all kind of a blur. I remember. Oh yeah, we had this other scene where there were sheep. There was a scene where sheep were involved in something, and I remember that. I remember we were trying to do a scene where Leslie was trying to herd a whole group of sheep. Don't ask me why. I can't quite remember what the specifics was, what craziness it was. But I remember at the time, I had just finished earlier, done a couple of animal movies for Disney. And when they were talking about the sheep, I looked at, and Les, of course, was a producer too, so he had a fiduciary responsibility there. And I was looking at him and the producer, and I was saying, okay, so, and they thought I was joking. I said, okay, so you're bringing us professional sheep, right? And they started laughing. What do you mean? I go, well, you're not just going to go rent some sheep, are you? He goes, well, yeah. I go, no. You have to get sheep that have been trained to be able to listen to their trainer, to be able to take two, to be able to kind of do things, to be able to hit their marks. And there are all animals. These are all animals you see in movies are professional animals. They're trained in a way. And they went, no, don't be ridiculous. And I went, I'm telling you guys, if you don't get professional sheep, you are in for a shock of your life. And of course, they didn't listen, and they just got some guy from a farm to bring some of these sheep there. And it went on for days, trying to get the sheep to do what we wanted them to do. And of course, what the sheep did more than anything was basically crap all over the set, day in and day out, with Leslie bellowing away at it, screaming at the sheep. I mean, screaming at the sheep. It's like, yeah, that's really going to work, Leslie. I remember the sheep incident. I don't remember that. It was one of those situations where it was kind of more surreal than the picture itself. I tried my best and did my best to do it, and following that in the editing room, trying to kind of fix everything up and kind of get it where it was going. But it was brutal. The reception was brutal. It simply was one of those pictures that had great intentions, but the realization was a little different. Quite frankly, we should have made the movie about the making of the movie. That was funny. Producers, of course, when it started getting, audience reactions to it. Now, at that point, Leslie could not deny, that it was not as funny as he hoped it would be, because the audiences were reacting to it. And then, we kind of changed a few things here, there, and everywhere, but, it wasn't gonna. Was not to be. Maybe, if Jeff had hired a better comedy director than me, maybe this other person might have been able to find something, to be able to tease something out of it. But as hard as I tried, I definitely kept coming up short. So I pretty much wanted to slit my wrists. We just kind of basically did our best in trying to make it as good as possible. But it really was not, it was not, let me put it this way, it was definitely, for me, I realized I will never inflict an Alan Goldstein comedy on anyone on this planet again. That's the end of it. Bring me back to action and drama, and I'll be happy to do that. But a straight-out comedy, I thought, okay, Alan, this is definitely not your métier.
Throughout the early 2000s, Nielsen would continue to make more parodies, reteaming with David Zucker from Airplane on American Carol and the Scary Movie franchise. He made one more return to Scary Movie parodies with a bit part as a female waitress in Stan Helsing, written and directed by Bo Zenga. Director, Bo Zenga.
I was looking to direct something, and directing your first feature is a tough one. I've hired first-time directors, and it was tough to get them cleared by the studio or the financiers or whoever, the stars. So even though I said I wasn't going to do any more spoofs, I came up with an idea, a high-concept idea to do a spoof, which was Stan Helsing, and the idea was that Scary Movie and some other movies were spoofing all these kind of older monsters and stuff. And what we were doing was we were going to spoof the biggest, more recent movie monsters of all time. And I wrote the script. I was getting great. Everyone was like, this is really funny. This is really funny. But, it takes a while. So one day I said to my assistant who had a background in graphic design, I drew a poster and said, can you do this? And he said, yeah, I can do that. So he would, throughout just that day, keep coming back to me and showing it to me. And it was looking good. And then at some point, it was awesome. Shortly thereafter, late at night, I was at the desk in my bedroom. I'm really giving you the nitty-gritties now, aren't I? And I wrote I can't remember if I wrote him or he wrote me, but I probably reached out first to a guy named Jerry Zucker, who was a big distribution guy, and he had his own company. And I said to him, "What are you up to?" A little chit chat, and then he wrote to me, "What are you up to?" And I set him up to this, and I sent him the poster, and he wrote back and he was like, "I love this. How do I get involved?" So that started the ball rolling. That I had a foreign deal in place right away. So that was it. It was equity, it was soft money. It was tax rebates and everything like that. And I went up to Vancouver and I shot it. And then, when I got up there and I was casting, it's not that I was like, oh, I have to have Leslie Nielsen in this movie. But what happened was I asked the casting director to let me know everyone that was in town shooting. Because, going to see them personally is always better than 27 phone calls with their agent. So on that list was Leslie. And I found out where he was, and I called over there and set up a time, and I went over, and he was in makeup by himself, it was just his guy working on him. And walked in, introduced myself. We had a great conversation, really, really liked him. He was smart. And then I handed him the script, and I said, you can have any part in the movie, just pick one. And he's like, okay, I'll do that, And then it got back to me that he wanted to play Kay the waitress. And I was like, okay, wow, that wasn't what I expected, but sure. I don't remember him saying to me, hey, I've been dying to play a woman, but I got the feeling that he thought it would be funny to play a woman. And we decided that he wasn't going to be an attractive woman on purpose. I think anytime a guy plays a woman, it's probably not an attractive woman. But I remember the makeup person showing me through like a very, very fine mustache on him. And it was hysterical. Again, that's a subtle thing. Some people see it, some people won't. But, that's what happens in a movie. You try to make everything a joke. The props are jokes. The set decoration are jokes. So, yeah, that's the part he wanted to play. We immediately start talking about what color his hair should be. He didn't want it to be white like his own. So we got sort of a reddish wig. And he was awesome. When Leslie stepped on the set, it was like a comic superstar idol stepped on the set. And our cast, who was really talented and really great with comedy, there was like a ton of hero worship that went on. And he liked them. Like I remember the first setup, we did them and stuff, and they were all on the scene, and he came over to me and was like, they're good. Like, they're funny. I'm going to have fun with them, And that's what happened. He was funny, and we had a good time, and he was fun to be with. So he played Kay the waitress. Now, in all the movies I've made, the greatest regret by far I have is I named that character after a waitress that worked in Nathan House in Beverly Hills, who waited on me for years and eventually got cancer and succumbed eventually to it. And just sort of as a little, ode to her, I called the character Kay. It only meant something to me, not to anyone else. However, once I got into editing, I realized I missed the greatest opportunity ever, because that waitress's name tag should have said Shirley. I blew it. You get it, right?
I'm playing a girl. Yeah. And they're going to be asking me to leave soon.
I would see him a lot, and we would have lunch together a lot. A lot of times the director will have lunch 1 time, 2 times, 4 times but I did with Leslie because we were in the same hotel and we would walk across the street and eat at the same restaurant. And he was hysterical because it's a well-known thing that Leslie carries around a little fart machine, makes little fart noises, like big fart noises. And it's this white, it's weird. It's not like electronic like you'd think and like I would want, but it's this little white plastic thing that he would squeeze, and he could like really manipulate it so that it made. I remember he gave me one, and I couldn't even get a sound out of it. Like it was like handing me a trumpet. So he was so good with it. So he basically do it every time, every meal, and it never got old. And also, I'm still 12 years old, and I think fart noises are funny. So I would lose it, and the waitress would come over and she'd be taking the order. And then Leslie, in the middle of ordering, would pause and then lean a little to his side, like he was facilitating a fart. And he would make the noise, and like the waitress would just be like, oh my God, but she wouldn't say anything. She was trying to be professional. And that just made it that much more funny. And then Leslie would tilt back and continue ordering. He would do that. We'd walk through a crowd. He'd fart. We'd be escorted to our table, and he'd be, you have to squeeze through a couple tables. And as he squeezed through, he'd, rip a few. And as silly as all this sounds, it was always funny as hell. So there was that. He really had a sense of himself. We went to Comic-Con, and I didn't know what kind of reception we were going to Comic-Con. This is the point when the studios start really showing up with their biggest movies. So I thought we were going to be that little movie. But because of the movie monsters we were spoofing, and because I had a very young, hip, funny cast, I had Steve Howie, and I had Kenan Thompson, and I had Desi Lydic and other people like that. And then, of course, I had Leslie. So we sat there and we signed posters, and we were like rock stars. I mean, I remember them leading us from the green room to our area where, the big Stan Helsing poster is, and the table where you sign everything. And and I was like, this is what the Beatles must have felt like. They were all over us. I mean, listen, they weren't all over me, and who the hell I was, but that whole crew, I went last so I could just watch, and it was just, high fives and hugs and, girls pulling their top down to get a autograph on their chest area, and just craziness, really craziness. We finally made it to our table. As slowly as we walked along, security figured out that we needed security. So they sort of came over, and by the time we got to our table, we had security making sure we made it to the table. And then we signed posters and everything. But Leslie was the superstar. So then after we signed posters, we did our panel. And I remember I walked in the room just to look at the layout, and it was gigantic. And I remember thinking, I wish they'd given us a little room, and we were overflowing. So time came, we were backstage. I did that thing where you peek through the curtain and see what's going on, and the place was packed. It was so awesome. I mean, you could feel the energy. And then we came out, and Leslie came last, and the place just went nuts. He was so smart about marketing. He had on a bomber jacket and aviator glasses, which of course is exactly what he should have been wearing because of airplane. And he walked out, and he walked up to the mic. We weren't even supposed to do that. We were supposed to go sit down, and then, a moderator was going to ask questions. And he walked up to the microphone, and he looked out at the crowd, and he said, "You're all under arrest." And the place went crazy. such a simple line, but him just telling them that. So he was just great. He was so fun and playful and smart, and his comic timing was perfect. And God, it was good working with him.
Nielsen's final film to be released was Stonerville in 2011. It went straight to video. Director, Bill Corcoran.
Well, there was a producer on that movie who I'd done a couple of projects with, and I had just finished a movie for him with Melissa Gilbert, and we had shot it in L.A., and he came to me at one point in time, and he said, well, look, I've got this movie that a friend of mine is, financing, and it's very, very low budget, but it might be fun. You haven't done a lot of comedy, and, would you like to do a kind of crazy comedy? And I'll tell you the truth, at first I looked at the script and I thought, oh boy, this is so broad and so not what I feel comfortable with, because I hadn't done, that kind of really broad comedy. So I turned it down a couple of times, and then he came back to me and he said, look, we'll get these kids in and we can rewrite it and we can rework it, but I really need you to do it, and would you, come on board? And I had just been finishing up post-production on a movie, and I had some time, so I said, okay, I'll come in and let's do the best we can of it. And so that's how it really started. I loved working with Leslie. He was on board the first week of pre-production. He had just finished up something else. We knew from his agent that his health wasn't the best, and we agreed to bring on his makeup person and provide him with a trailer and a couple of other things. But he seemed to want to do it, and I think he was excited about working with these young kids who were on the show as well. He was not well. He had a number of things that just physically were bothering him and stuff like that. But his memory and his sharpness was probably as good as any actor I've worked with. He was very sharp, very like many comedians. He wasn't ever trying to be funny or I didn't feel like he felt like he had to be on. He was very serious about his comedy. Well, he really, had huge respect for those guys he did the Airplane and Naked Gun and things like that with. He talked about them a little bit while we were shooting, and the guys, the younger actors that we had, really looked up to him, obviously, and really wanted to get information about those early movies that are classic movies that Leslie had done, and working with those directors and those writers. As you're kind of anticipating, right, you get somebody who brings in the kind of history that Leslie does, and he walks on set, and with these young kids, there's a sense of, oh my God, I'm working with Leslie Nielsen, and it's such an honor, and all that. And he just, he's got his fart machine, and he bends over, and there's a huge fart that blows out, and everybody, then it has a great laugh, and it releases all the tension in the room, and off you go to work. He was old Hollywood, right? I mean, for me, that just really came across the way he came into set, all the sort of, the way he treated everybody with kindness and caring. He knew everybody's name on the set by the end of the day. He took a real interest in all the other people who were there. It's just that graciousness and old Hollywood way that is so astounding, and that I rarely see anymore on any movies or TV or wherever I go. And it's something that he embodied and brought to that set. And I think that the kids who were on the set, the young actors, really took something away from that and thought, that's what I want to be.
Leslie Nielsen's last theatrical release would be Spanish Movie in 2009. He played Dr. Nielsen in the foreign parody film. Director, Javier Ruiz Caldera.
We did here in Spain the first spoof comedy, the first one in the Spanish industry, Spanish cinema industry, and we wanted Leslie Nielsen on it because we dreamed about it. I mean, it was my first movie, and I never dreamed about having such an icon of the comedy as Leslie Nielsen on my first movie. But we tried, and with the help of Andrew Dean, my manager in LA, we called him, and he was really excited about coming to Spain and be part of the movie. He loves Spain, and he was very surprised to be such famous in Europe. I mean, here in Spain, everybody loved him. Everybody know who he is, and it's, as I said, an icon. And he was very surprised. He's a very humble man. It's good to know that such an icon like him is still humble. And we tried, and he came, and he made a shooting for 3 days. But it was a very short film, a very short cameo. You know what cameo is? We take Leslie Nielsen, and we take the most famous Spanish comedian, who is Chiquito La Calzada, and we put it together, and we see how it happened. It was what it happened in the theater is what it happened in the real life. We shoot like it was a National Geographic. I mean, with 2 cameras, and let's do it. And they don't know each other, and it was so crazy because the Spanish comedian, he speaks Spanish a very strange Spanish, and of course Leslie Nielsen don't speak Spanish at all. He don't understand Spanish, and his fart machine was his way to communicate with the Spanish people. I'm sure when he don't understand something, because he was a Spanish movie in a Spanish language, and when he don't understand nothing, he used the fart machine, and everybody laughed. It was amazing. It was a lesson for all the crew. He was my first movie, and the first movie of almost all the people involved, all the actors, and having Leslie Nielsen on it was like how a man, an old man, because he was old. We did it when he was 82 years old, maybe, and he has an energy and a sense of humor. He was the youngest man in the set. I mean, between action and cut, he was the youngest man in the set. Then when you said cut, of course, the 82 years old appear, and he needs to rest. But he knew very well what is important for making movies, and the important thing is between the action till cut. And it was a real lesson. And he was so nice and so humble, and talking with everybody, making jokes with his fart machine, with his faces, with everything. It was, I will never forget that lesson of being how a star can be so close. He came for the promotion of the movie in theaters. He came to the opening night. He was and he was really, really tired at this time, even more than during the shooting, I think. But in the biggest TV show in Spain called Buenafuente, with Buenafuente, in the backstage. In the backstage, he has a little accident. I mean, his foot, he falls into the floor. Okay, and everybody said, oh, he's an 82 years old man, and he falls all and boom with a strong noise. Everybody was scared, and then everybody gets close to him, and then we heard. And he plays his fart machine completely on the floor. He was and everybody started laughing. I mean, it was a real accident, but the way his behavior was making a joke after his accident, and he was amazing also.
The writers and directors that have spoken about Nielsen on this episode have done so with such clarity and specificity that it's almost as if he were still alive, even though he passed away more than 10 years ago of pneumonia at Holy Cross Hospital in Florida. And based on all the stories you've heard today, we can almost be certain that he had his whoopee cushion in hand. Though Nielsen may be dead, the farter whoopee cushion lives on with director Bob Logan.
He always liked me. I've always felt proud about that. He always genuinely liked me, and I knew it. And I adored him, because here's a man who had done it all, who had no ego whatsoever. He would just, hi, how you doing? Let's play golf. Let's get to drink. And boy, could he drink. I'll tell you something. Woo! But he drank too. And he knew how to hold it. He looked great. He could drink and make you think he's a teetotaler, you know. So yeah, no, I had a relationship with him all the way to the end, and it broke my heart when he passed. But at the same time, I also thought this man did it all. All he had to do was walk around, fake farting. You know, people would always yell out, "Hey, Shirley," to him. He loved that too. Don't call me Shirley. And then he made their life by saying that. You know, Leslie Nielsen said, "Don't call me Shirley." As a matter of fact, he sent me. You know, I'm one of the carriers of the farter. You know, I have been using it since he gave it to me in 1989. So now it's going on, 30 years. 30 years I've been using the farter. I got the farter here. I still use it. He was mischievous in a really positive, fun way. And I miss my friend.
Nielsen's career had varied ups and downs after he achieved stardom. The problem was he established some of the most iconic American comedy characters, which made him a star. But his follow-ups generally fell flat. There are still moments in these films in which Nielsen shines, but no one was able to successfully utilize his comedy in the way that Airplane and The Naked Gun had. Leslie Nielsen was one of the biggest comedy stars at 62 years old. It was a peak that he couldn't possibly sustain. The extraordinary run simply couldn't last forever. Like his fart machine, Nielsen kept doing the same jokes over and over and over, and the public grew tired of it. However, the man himself was a one-of-a-kind joke, a rare singularity in the world of comedy. And unlike his farts, Nielsen's movies will hang in the air forever.